It began with a sound no one expected to hear, not the hollow crunch of loose earth, not the splash of underground water, but the sharp ring of metal striking solid stone. 40 feet beneath an ordinary Texas farm in the spring of 1852, 3 settlers paused in silence. They dug around the obstruction, expecting to find a single boulder. Instead, the stone kept going, foot after foot, perfectly straight. When they cleared another section, it changed direction at what appeared to be a precise right angle. Men who had spent their lives breaking rock stood staring into the hole. Because nature wasn't supposed to look like this. Word spread across the frontier that something impossible had been buried beneath the Texas prairie, and believed it was the remains of a forgotten civilization. Others insisted it was proof that history had overlooked an entire chapter of America's past, more than 170 years later. Geologists, historians, and curious visitors are still standing over the same mystery, asking the same question. What did those settlers really uncover beneath the ground? This is the story of the buried wall that gave an entire Texas town its name. In the spring of 1852, the Blackland Prairie of north-central Texas offered immense promise, but very little mercy. For early settlers like Benjamin Boydston, Terry Utley Wade, and William Clay Stevenson, survival on this isolated frontier was governed by a single, unrelenting daily reality: the search for water. The Trinity River was miles away, and the seasonal creeks quickly baked into cracked mud under the Texas sun. Without a reliable well, a new homestead simply could not exist. Every shovel of dirt was driven by the raw necessity of survival, requiring exhausting, back-breaking labor. Day after day, the men hauled heavy iron tools to a small plot on the farmstead, digging through thick, sticky clay. Every foot descended was a battle against the earth, won with shovels, sweat, and a hand-driven auger. The prairie wind was their only constant companion, carrying the dry scent of dust across empty, silent horizons. They worked in near-total isolation, knowing that their crops, their livestock, and their families depended entirely on what lay deep beneath the soil. By the time their spades reached 40 feet below the surface, the air inside the narrow shaft had grown cool and damp. They were searching for the life-giving moisture of an underground aquifer, expecting nothing more than the wet mud of a successful strike. But 40 feet down, the ordinary routine of frontier survival was about to be shattered. Benjamin Boydston stood in the cramped darkness of the shaft, working the heavy iron auger into the damp floor. Up at the surface, Terry Wade and William Stevenson hauled the guide ropes, waiting for the familiar pull of wet clay that would signal a successful water strike. The work was rhythmic, slow, and exhausting. Then, the iron tool hit something solid. The impact sent a sharp metallic ring vibrating up the shaft, followed by an echoing crack that cut through the quiet prairie. Boydston stopped. He struck the ground again. The same hard, unyielding resistance met the iron tip, ringing out like a hammer hitting an anvil. On the Texas frontier, the ground was supposed to be deep, soft clay. Finding a solid barrier at this depth was unexpected. Boydston knelt in the cold mud, using his bare hands to clear away the loose sediment. He expected to find a stray boulder, a common obstacle that would force them to abandon the shaft. Instead of a rounded boulder, his fingers traced a flat, level block. As he scraped away more of the damp earth, he realized the stone stood perfectly vertical, plunging straight down into the darkness. The 3 men stared down into the narrow pit. The search for water was instantly forgotten, replaced by a quiet, unsettling confusion. Deep beneath the untouched prairie, they had struck something that felt entirely unnatural. As more clay was cleared away from the dark shaft, the sheer scale and geometry of the obstacle began to challenge everything the diggers understood about the natural world. This was not a chaotic pile of buried river stone or a massive solitary boulder. What lay exposed in the lantern light was a flat vertical surface composed of individual, interlocking blocks. The stones appeared to be uniform, rectangular slabs, tightly fitted together. They were stacked in neat horizontal courses, separated by fine lines that looked remarkably like mortar joints. The face of the structure was flush, rising straight up through the dark earth with a precision that defied the irregular, chaotic patterns typical of geological formations. But the most unsettling discovery lay just a few feet along the face of the barrier. Following the line of the stones, the observers discovered that this structure did not curve or taper away. It ran in a perfectly straight line, completely flat and level, before making a sharp, clean turn. It was a precise right angle. In nature, straight lines are rare, but 90-degree corners are almost non-existent. To the men standing at the bottom of that pit, tracing the cold, damp seam of stone with their fingers, the visual evidence was overwhelming. Every physical characteristic, from the brick-like proportions of the blocks to the deliberate layout of the turn, pointed to human hands. It was almost impossible, looking down into the narrow trench, to see anything other than a buried wall, built with deliberate intent and hidden by time. The sheer order of the stonework, resting 40 feet beneath untouched prairie soil, created a profound sense of unease. It forced a silent, troubling question. If nature did not build this, who did? Word of the extraordinary discovery quickly spread past the edges of the damp well shaft. On the isolated Texas frontier, news of such an anomaly traveled rapidly along mail carriage routes and during Sunday gatherings, drawing curious neighbors to the farmstead. What began as one family's strange encounter quickly transformed into a collective obsession. As other settlers began sinking wells on their own properties across the area, the mystery deepened. Shovel after shovel struck the same hard, unyielding stone at almost identical depths. This appeared to be far more than a localized curiosity or a single buried boulder. A massive, silent structure was threading its way beneath the entire prairie, showing itself wherever the settlers dared to dig. By 1854, the growing settlement decided to formalize its relationship with the mystery. Kaufman County precinct minutes record that the residents petitioned the Texas legislature for a post office under a new permanent name, Rockwall. When the county itself was established in 1873, commissioners once again chose the name to define their entire jurisdiction. The town's very identity was now anchored to the hidden monument beneath their feet. To the 19th century mind, the explanation for these perfectly aligned blocks seemed clear. Observers of the era viewed the formation as a deliberate, man-made construction. Speculation spread of a massive prehistoric fortification or a forgotten outpost built by an ancient civilization long before the first American pioneers arrived. On the frontier, this was a highly rational reaction to an impossible sight. For the people of Rockwall, the daily routine of farming and building was now played out directly on top of a silent, monumental secret. In the autumn of 1874, the search for answers moved from frontier gossip to formal scientific investigation. Richard Burleson, a geologist active in Texas, arrived in the young settlement of Rockwall. He did not come to investigate legends of prehistoric builders or lost empires. Instead, he wanted to examine the physical reality of the stone, descending into the damp shafts to inspect the exposed sections firsthand. Burleson's field notes, preserved in an 1874 diary, record his immediate observations. He studied the dense, massive texture of the blocks. He noted the lack of typical sedimentary layering, focusing on the specific mineral patterns embedded within the stone. To his eye, this was not the work of human masons. His actual explanation, however, was unexpected. Burleson concluded that the formation was igneous in origin. In his field judgment, these vertical barriers were volcanic intrusions, molten material that had forced its way upward through fractures in the earth, cooling into dense block-like sheets. His analysis represented the first systematic attempt to explain the rock wall using the laws of nature. By offering a geological explanation, Burleson gave the phenomenon legitimacy within the scientific community. He confirmed that the settlers had struck a real, physical structure, but his volcanic theory soon met with quiet skepticism. If these walls were forged by molten rock, the surrounding clay should have shown signs of intense heat. Yet no such burning was visible. His field notes remained a preliminary judgment rather than an absolute truth. The volcanic theory did not settle the debate, it deepened it. If a trained observer could look at the stones and see volcanic activity, while others saw ancient masonry, the true origin of the formation was more elusive than ever. At the turn of the 20th century, Robert T. Hill, a geologist who would later be recognized as the father of Texas geology, arrived in Rockwall to conduct a systematic analysis of the stone. Hill was not looking for ancient builders, but for physical data. In 1901, after examining several exposed segments, he documented that the formation was composed of fine-grained quartz sand cemented together by calcium carbonate. He proposed that these were clastic sand dikes, sedimentary material that had been forced under immense pressure into cracks in the earth. To Hill, the wall was not built from the ground up, but injected from below. Yet his explanation left many unsatisfied, as it still struggled to account for the sheer uniformity of the stone blocks. 8 years later, in 1909, the mystery drew the attention of the United States Geological Survey. Geologist Sidney Page descended into the area to map the dikes systematically, publishing his findings in the journal Science. Page traversed the county, measuring the orientation and dip of each exposure. What he discovered challenged the very idea of a single continuous monument. The dikes did not form a single unbroken perimeter around the town. Instead, Page mapped a series of disconnected sandstone sheets, running in completely different directions. However, Page also made an observation that explained why the settlers had been so thoroughly deceived. He noted that the vertical joints in the sandstone often aligned directly above one another. This natural fracturing created a clean, staggered pattern that perfectly mimicked human masonry. Rather than solving the mystery, these findings transformed it. If Hill and Page were correct, then the Earth itself had somehow constructed a massive, geometrically precise imitation of a human fortress. The question was no longer who had laid the stones, but how nature could produce a design so deceptively perfect. The physical evidence gathered over decades of geological mapping reveals a phenomenon known as a clastic sandstone dike. Millions of years ago, during the Cretaceous period, this entire region lay beneath a shallow inland sea. Layers of soft clay and shale slowly accumulated on top of the thick, water-saturated sands of the Trinity Group. As more sediment piled on top, the weight grew immense. The trapped water within the buried sand could not escape, creating extreme pressurized pockets of liquid and sediment well below the surface. Eventually, shifting tectonic forces pulled at the earth, cracking the overlying shale. This sudden drop in pressure acted like a puncture in a pressurized container, and the liquefied sand from below was forced violently upward, rushing into the newly formed vertical fractures. As the slurry filled these cracks, it assumed the exact shape of the fissures, long, flat, vertical sheets cutting directly through the surrounding clay. Over immense stretches of time, as the water drained away, minerals like calcium carbonate precipitated from the groundwater, binding the sand grains together until the entire mixture hardened into solid stone. Because the original cracks in the shale formed along clean, straight stress lines, The resulting sandstone sheets formed with remarkably flat surfaces. As the sandstone cooled and dried, it contracted, fracturing vertically at regular intervals. This natural cracking created joints that look identical to individual hand-carved blocks stacked in neat rows. Where these subterranean stress fractures crossed, they formed clean, sharp 90-degree turns. To the settlers standing in the mud of a hand-dug well, this natural process was entirely invisible. They saw only the end result, a structure that perfectly mimicked human design. But understanding the wall as a natural occurrence does not make the discovery less astonishing. Similar clastic dikes exist in the Badlands of South Dakota, standing as prominent vertical walls long after the softer surrounding earth has eroded away. It reveals that the earth, through the simple application of pressure, water, and time, managed to draft a design so precise that it captured the imagination of a frontier, proving that nature's own architecture can easily rival our own. Science provides a clear, rational explanation for the sandstone sheets beneath the Texas soil, yet the human eye remains notoriously difficult to convince. When standing before these excavated stones, the visual illusion is almost absolute. The clean horizontal seams, the staggered blocks, and the sharp right angles do not look like a geological accident. They look like a blueprint. This powerful visual mimicry explains why local legends never truly faded. The enduring fascination in Rockwall persists as a form of cultural memory. It is a response to an Earth that refuses to look natural, keeping observers suspended in a state of quiet wonder, where what is known to be true struggles against what is seen. Science has mapped the stone, yet the human imagination refuses to be contained. The real mystery of Rockwall isn't how the Earth formed this structure, but why we so desperately want it to be built by human hands. We look at the silent ground and listen for our own echoes. Do you believe some secrets are still waiting to be found? Let us know in the comments.